Welcome back here on Live Now from Fox, giving you a live look at the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. this morning as the sun does come up there. We are going to talk election headlines right now as Republicans now have full control of the government, giving them their best shot yet to make big moves on immigration and tax cuts. Republicans gained control of the Senate for the first time in 4 years, and key close races in the House were called Wednesday night to keep the GOP in control there as well. House Speaker Mike Johnson has been planning for full GOP control. He's got a conservative economic agenda ready to move through the House, Senate, and the White House. But when was the last time the GOP controlled the House of Representatives, the Senate, and the presidency all at one time? And what issues can we expect Republicans to tackle day one? Let's bring in a friend of the show, Rich Rubino, political analyst. Always appreciate you joining us here on Live Now from Fox.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, of course. So again, this question that I just asked, when was the last time that this happened, that we've seen the presidency and both chambers of Congress under Republican control?
Well, we've seen it a couple times in history. We certainly saw it with Donald Trump in the first 2 years that he was in the presidency, and he really worked with the House of Representatives to get his tax cut proposal, for example, passed in the United States House of Representatives. You also saw some more bipartisan legislation like the Music Modernization Act, for example. But usually what happens, and generally speaking, is it's very hard to get something through the United States Senate because in the United States Senate, you have the issue of the filibuster, and the filibuster means that you foundationally need 60 votes to get something passed, not really 50. So you have to use what's called reconciliation to get that down to 50 votes to get that passed. And sometimes in history, we've had scenarios where presidents have had problems with their own party. Jimmy Carter, for example, did not like much pork barrel in legislation, so he would oftentimes try to veto legislation, and as a result, he had kind of he had a hard relationship sometimes with Speaker Tip O'Neill of his own party.
How easy is this going to be for Trump to pass legislation the next 4 years here?
I don't think it's going to be that easy because at least in the United States Senate, he only has a three points advantage, 53 to 47, assuming that Senator Casey at some point will concede the election in Pennsylvania. So, and then you take away two very moderate Republicans in Lisa Murkowski of Alaska and Susan Collins of Maine, and they can essentially vote either way on a lot of pieces of legislation, a lot of confirmations, for example. Then you take somebody like Tom Tillis from North Carolina, who's up for re-election in a blue state, in kind of a purple state in 2026. And then you have Bill Cassidy, a senator from a very conservative state of Louisiana. He's also somebody who voted for the conviction of Donald Trump the last time in 2020. So you do have some Republicans that potentially could be recalcitrant or could be rebels in that respect. And in the House of Representatives, he has a very narrow majority, which means that he will have to go, in many respects, sometimes to some of the members of the House of Representatives that have been kind of adversarial to him, like Don Newhouse, for example, of Washington, and Dan Vallejo of California, both who voted for the impeachment last time around of Donald Trump. So potentially he could work across the aisle. There's some more moderate to conservative Democrats like Marie Perez from Washington, Jared Golden of Maine. Jared Golden of Maine is somebody who's very much in favor of his tariff proposal, for example. So you might have some kind of cross-pollination, if you will, but it's certainly going to be, he's going to need every single vote because he does not have overwhelming majorities in either the House or the Senate.
I did want to talk about these Trump cabinet picks because some of them raised some eyebrows amongst Republicans, one of them being Congressman Matt Gaetz. Of course, he led that movement to try to oust former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. Is this a test, so to speak, from Trump to these Republicans on whether or not they will defy him or maybe make it a bit difficult to appoint some of these people?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that folks that are, first of all, the Senate is in charge of confirmation, so the House has nothing to do with the confirmation or the Constitution. So senators like, for example, Tom Tillis of North Carolina, he'll be up for re-election in 2026, a very hard state, very much of a purple state. And it might be to his political benefit if he's trying to say that he's independent of President Trump to vote against some of the president's nominees. And certainly Matt Gaetz would be one of those. Susan Collins comes from a state that is relatively Democratic, that was really not a swing state this time around. it would be to her political benefit also to vote against somebody like Matt Gaetz. Lisa Murkowski comes from a conservative state, but she has shown her moderate bona fides on a litany of issues. And then someone like Senator Cassidy simply does not always vote the party line with Donald Trump. So he will have some issues, and it will be very hard to see a scenario, especially with Joe Manchin no longer a Democrat, no longer in the Senate, John Tester no longer in the United States Senate, where Donald Trump can work across party lines to try to get somebody like Matt Gaetz through. So he really needs every solitary vote, and to see if there's some sort of deals there. But it is very possible that it could just be a test of fidelity to Donald Trump.
And going off of that, are there any issues that Republicans may clash with Trump on, tariffs being one of them, perhaps?
Tariffs, absolutely. The Republican Party, every Republican presidential nominee from Eisenhower in '52 all the way through Romney in 2012 were foundationally free traders. They favored open markets. It is the Republican belief, and certainly the Libertarian belief, is that the United States needs to open up markets. George W. Bush in 2000 ran on that when he ran for president. John McCain ran on that. Mitt Romney ran on that. It is really antithetical to I think many conservatives, many contemporaneous conservatives, to be against free trade. That being said, Donald Trump has transmogrified what the Republican Party means with their ideological framework. So I think a lot of Republicans are kind of scrambling and are changing their ideology. Folks like Newt Gingrich, for example, who as the whip in the House of Representatives from Georgia tried to get the NAFTA passed back in 1994, now says that GATT rather in 94 and NAFTA in 1993, now says that he agrees with Donald Trump on trade. So Donald Trump may be able to bring a lot of these Republicans over to his new, more populist, which is more populist than it is conservative.
Real quick, Rich, I want to ask you this before we have to wrap up here, but day one, you know, these topics of abortion and economy, immigration, these were so big during the election cycle. Day one here, what do you think Republicans are going to get to work on?
I think Donald Trump is going to. There's a lot he can do in terms of executive orders. One of the things is to get rid of, for example, the Mexico City policy, which involves abortion in terms of international organizations. Most presidents either support it or do not support it. So he'll sign a lot of executive orders. I don't think there'll be any legislation that Congress will pass necessarily on day one. He has pledged to get the war between the Ukraine and Russia over with before he becomes president. So that is quite a tall order. We'll see what he can do on that. But it really is very hard to get something substantial done without Congress's approval. And there are certainly things you can do with executive orders. You can certainly send your nominations to the United States Senate and hope they get confirmed. And some of them, like Doug Burgum in Interior, for example, might be uncontroversial. So those might get passed pretty with alacrity, if you will. But I think that's basically what happens on day one.
All right, Rich Rubino, political analyst. Always appreciate you coming on. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me on again.
Of course.